Mwahaha, and welcome to my Halloween video on this spooky One second. Alright, time to find a new screensaver. It's November already? I guess I can change the topic of the video. Oh my god. I missed Christmas. I gotta call my family. No. 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 I waited too long to make a video. I waited too long! Oh my god. Okay. I just passed out for a bit. Okay. Thank god. It's still January? Let's fix this first, shall we? That's natural, right? Wearing a beanie in a video that you film in your own home? That's natural. That's normal. People do that. Well, I may have missed my window for my Halloween video, but instead of despairing the endless march of time, how about we celebrate it by looking back on what some of the best games of 2024 were? 2024 was a mixed bag as far as video games go. For each banger 10 out of 10 experience, there was one that failed to deliver or was just disappointing. And I'm saying this as someone who played both Suicide Squad and Concord and found things to enjoy about them. But of course, that's not even mentioning the absolute turmoil in the industry this year. Thousands of people lost their jobs as a direct result of corporate greed and year after year profit chasing. To say that I'm worried about the future of this industry that I love so much would be an understatement. But even in dark times, it's important to shine a light on the people who put so much time, love, and care into crafting some truly outstanding games. Some games that have pushed the medium forward, some that have provided some brilliant comfort and escape, and all of which have provided me countless hours of joy this year. Please do not count the hours. So today we're going to talk about my top 10 games of 2024, and let's begin with number 10, Another Crab's Treasure. To anyone who's tuned into any of my streams, it probably comes as no surprise that I love Souls-like games. Why? Ah, come on! I don't think this guy poisons. Oh my god. I just love them so much. But lesser known is my love for 3D platformers. So what do you get when you mix them together, add in some bright colors and fantastic writing? You get Aggro Crab's sophomore release and the best full Souls-like I've played this year. While more simplistic than some of the other games in its subgenre, Another Crab's Treasure makes up for that with sardonic humor, a story of the importance of community, and a cathartic takedown of capitalistic greed, which actually, we really need all of those things right now. The shell mechanic is its most unique here, our hermit crab hero taking different everyday items as a makeshift shield, all with different stats and abilities. It's a formula that makes for unique setups and builds, even when the actual skill trees themselves aren't all that deep. What this team was able to put together here was a blast to play through, and after seeing how much they've grown from their previous game, Going Under, it's fair to say Aggro Crab is absolutely on my indie devs to watch list. Let's shift gears for now from the indie to the double A with Arrowhead's Helldivers 2. Boy, this sure came out of nowhere, huh? As someone who was only ever vaguely familiar with the original Helldivers, to see this come out and take over the gaming world like it did last April was a blast. You know, when the servers were working. Yeah, this was a game for me that wasn't even originally going to make my top 10 of the year because of how busted it was at launch. Long queuing times, frequent hard crashes, and weird server-based bugs plagued this bad boy for quite a while. It wasn't until I returned a few months later that I really began to see the enjoyment Helldivers 2 has to offer. The easiest sell to those who are unfamiliar is that this is just a Starship Troopers video game with all of the hyper-violent satire that comes along with such a premise. Your goal is to defend democracy by fighting in wars coordinated by your governmental body, Super Earth, a premise so on the nose that it's a wonder how there are some who still don't understand it. The joy of Helldivers, however, comes from its simplicity, feeling more like a modern PS2 game than anything else, with its chaotic co-op, streamlined mission structure, and its heavy focus on gameplay above all. Its missions can get a bit repetitive, but the devs are consistently adding new content attainable through in-game currency, and there just isn't another game out there right now with this level of PvE fun. And accidentally blowing away my friends with poorly placed stratagems just never got old to me, unless it was happening to me. I hated that shit. And now another swing from the new to the slightly new. It's number 8, Sonic Cross Shadow Generations. Man, what a past couple of years for Sonic the Hedgehog, huh? Feels like we're finally entering a new era for this series where every new game is expected to at least be good, and when something great slips through the cracks, well, we're all the better off for it. Shadow Generations specifically is that something great. What originally seemed to be a small expansion to sell the remaster of the original Sonic Generations ended up being a game unto itself with its own levels, hub world, and story. And for as much as I've done my best to keep up with the blue blur over the years, this expansion gave me renewed faith in the franchise. For lack of a better way of putting it, it just feels right to control Shadow. Sonic Team really outdid themselves with this one. The speed never impedes on the amount of control you have over even his more slight movements, and there wasn't that janky stop and go feeling that can plague Sonic's other 3D entries. No lie, the controls and level design are just so impeccable here that when I went to play the original Sonic Generations, I just couldn't do it. The hub world is a lot of fun to explore for collectibles, the levels are unironically epic in scale at times, and the challenge levels were a blast to get an S rank on. No matter where Sega takes this series next, I hope that they're keeping the design philosophy of this edgy hedgehog in mind. Actually, as I'm going through my list, I'm starting to notice that my top 10 vary pretty wildly in style and genre, and let's keep that going with number 7, Marvel Rivals. In a year filled with multiplayer failures, NetEase came bursting onto the scene with Overwatch 3. It looks a lot like Overwatch. It's not. Okay. With Marvel Rivals. Though you'd be forgiven for getting this twisted because Rivals is a 6v6 hero shooter in the same vein as Overwatch, and by same vein, I mean this is just Overwatch with Marvel heroes. I dabbled in Overwatch 1 and 2 back in the day, but just never found it to be my multiplayer forever home like so many others did. Rivals, on the other hand, I can see myself playing this one for a very long time. Hell, I already have, considering since December's launch I've put in... Oh no, that is way too many hours. I'm not going to read that out loud. The reason this one has spoken to me so much when the countless other multiplayer shooters couldn't is twofold. First of all, I love and care about these characters, and seeing them portrayed so expertly in a video game is a ton of fun. The way Scarlet Witch and Mantis fight are completely different, but fit their characters so well. The love and attention to detail is just oozing out of every moment of this game. You can really tell that this was crafted by fans of the source material. But the second reason it stuck so much for me is that it's just damn fun to play at any skill level. I'd like to consider myself decent at the game when I'm playing a character I understand. Definitely not this guy. But even when I'm losing, I'm having a great time with friends. But then I talked to my friend David, who hit Grandmaster rank and mostly plays competitively, and he's still loving his time with the game. Is it the most balanced multiplayer experience? Most certainly not, but that's what makes exploring its characters and meta strategies so engaging. I may not be the biggest fan of push the payload type matches, but for Marvel Rivals, I'm willing to stay on point. See, because it's like a thing in the game. Okay. Anyway, I've had enough of this multiplayer stuff, all right? Let's get into some lonely single-player games. Let's start with number 6, Nine Souls. I first became aware of Nine Souls from an Iron Pineapple video about the demo, and was instantly sold on its visual style and Sekiro-esque approach to 2D combat. And now, 2 years later, Red Candle has released it, and it is amazing. Sure, the things I was already sold on are here in spades, but with some visually stunning sequences and excellent combat and boss designs. But what I didn't expect was to be grabbed by the characters and story as well. When it comes to action games, more often than not, I could take or leave the story elements, and at first I felt the same way here. Over time though, I became increasingly invested in this revenge story laid before me as Yi took down his ex-coworkers one by one, and I learned more about their pasts and what led them to their ultimate demise. Its Metroidvania elements also take some time to warm up, but when they do, the exploration is fluid and challenging, even if there are some aspects I would still tweak here and there. Specifically the fast travel system that doesn't get fully implemented until later in the game. The original Dark Souls did this too, and while I understand the reasoning behind it, it makes exploring in the early game a bit of a pain to deal with. But these gripes I have are minor in the face of some of the most demanding and challenging 2D combat since Cuphead. By this point in my life, I've played a ton of challenging video games, but I've found that the ones that really stick with me are the games like Nine Souls that make the odds seem insurmountable upon first glance, but after studying patterns, perfecting parry timing, and learning punish windows, that impossible mountain to climb is now in the rear view, with an even bigger mountain now in front of you. But we're not done with the difficult games just yet, actually far from it. Next we'll move on to my number 5, Tomb Raider 1, 2, 3 Remastered. Hey, I know what you're thinking. Should this count for a best games of 2024 list? I mean, after all, this is just a remaster of 20-plus-year-old games where, with the press of a button, you can switch to the old graphics. I can see where you're coming from, and if the fresh coat of paint was the only thing they did to update this trilogy, I'd be inclined to agree with you. Instead, Aspyr took the controls and completely overhauled them, negating what was an obvious pain point for new players, while still leaving the options for tank controls if for some reason someone still wanted to use those. And even still, you may be scoffing at my inclusion of these games because, let's be honest, the age of them are starting to show a bit. If you didn't play them back on the PS1, I'm not even sure that I'd recommend them to you now. However, Tomb Raider is inherently woven into my gaming DNA. One of my earliest memories I have is of watching my dad play the original and me running away in fear when the T-Rex showed up. I have vivid, cherished memories of having my grandpa teach me how to play Tomb Raider 3 and exploring Croft Manor in the Nevada desert with his guidance. And Tomb Raider 2 was the first game I sought out when I decided that video game history was something that mattered to me. There's enough for me to say about this franchise that I could make a whole video going over the genius of these games and what they mean to me, and one day I just might, but reeling it back into the remasters for a minute, these are certainly not perfect remasters. There are some locations that look just a bit too glossed up to the point where they lose out on some of the original ambiance, and the new lighting can end up making some locations look a bit bland. Both of these complaints are mainly seen in Tomb Raider 3, but that game still has such a lo-fi beauty to it compared to the other two that any changes could be seen as an overall downgrade. However, despite some of these visual downgrades, I'm just so incredibly happy that these games have been preserved so faithfully, while also providing the necessary modern improvements needed to make this accessible to a new generation. This is a trilogy that deserves to be celebrated the way it has here, and I'm excited to play 4, 5, and 6 next month, seeing as I have next to no history with those games. Oh, and if you're wondering about my ranking, it goes 2, 1, 3. 3 is still my favorite, despite its, at times, frustrating design. Well, that was all just a little long-winded, wasn't it? How about now we dive into something a little bit more short and sweet with my number 4, Balatro. What the hell is this? A poker roguelike was the last genre of game I expected to fall in love with in 2024, and even still, Local Thunk's Balatro had control of me from its April release until, well, I'm not sure until when, because I still boot it up at least once a week looking for that perfect run. It's a design so perfect that even those who aren't entrenched in the gaming world can easily pick it up and get into it. You play poker hands for points, and in between each round, you use that money you've earned to purchase joker cards that act as point modifiers. Sure, there's a bit more of a minutia to it, but the game so perfectly fits at the crossroads of easy to learn, difficult to master. There are multiple different viable strategies that make each run feel unique? Do I want to bank on getting jokers that increase my points with each 2 pair I play? Do I want to destroy some cards in my deck to make my preferred hand easier? Or do I just want to invest everything into flushes like I do every single time without fail? They are my crutch, but I love them. It feels like once a year I get caught up in a new one more run type game, and I'm not sure any have been quite as addictive as this one has. I've put in well over 100 hours casually at this point, but if you're like my friend Aaron, who is going for the 100% completion, he's gotten over 600 hours at this point, nearing 700. I see this as a long-term game for me, one I can boot up at any time and get lost in, slowly working towards the Platinum Trophy, which is probably for the best, because if I ever played it too much in a day, I would end up seeing my flushes and the Wheel of Fortune nope when I was trying to sleep. And I'm not sure that there's a compliment higher for a video game than achieving the Tetris effect. All right, now we're starting to get into the top 3. And let's start with what is now my Let's take a detour from the official top 10 for now, shall we? And let's talk about what would have made my top 10 games had it been a full game. Elden Ring's outrageous expansion, Shadow of the Erdtree. A DLC so expansive, so rich with lore, so downright brutal, that many include it as a Game of the Year candidate in its own right. And while I think it definitely deserves a mention in the conversation, it wasn't until I went to get footage for the video and realized that I had to play through New Game Plus to get to it again, that I figured it probably shouldn't be included on my actual list. But don't misunderstand me, Shadow of the Erdtree is now my favorite DLC of all time. The way the open world is designed vertically to be so incredibly dense with things to find makes for some of the best From Software world design ever. And the intensity of the boss fights, while some might consider some of them unfair, was an excellent challenge and left me with a sense of triumph after having bested some of the studio's most overwhelming boss designs. It was also in the DLC that I discovered how much I love guard countering, and when I built my entire setup around just that, I made the game feel almost Sekiro-like with the amount of perfect blocking I was doing. Plus, I mean, it just melts some bosses like Commander Gaius, dude. He didn't stand a chance, man. I understand how some would hesitate to include this on a Game of the Year list, but that's why it's in an unnumbered bonus entry. I just couldn't bring myself to not give the From Software team their flowers for making the definitive action game expansion. All right, now we're starting to get into the top 3. And let's start with what is now my new favorite horror game ever made. Number 3 is the Silent Hill 2 remake from Bloober Team. Yeah, this is probably the biggest surprise of the year for me. This remake of what is probably the most beloved horror game of all time looked rough the first time it was presented. It looked so rough that I actually counterpicked it on my Fantasy Critic League, assuming that it would be bad. And this message about Fantasy Critic League is for one person and one person in particular. Brett, you're going down this year. Yeah, that did not work out for me. But I couldn't be more glad with how this turned out. I said in my written review that if Resident Evil is a Hollywood blockbuster, Silent Hill 2 is an art house film. They both play around with similar gameplay styles, they're both survival horror, but their approach to horror is entirely different. I'm not really sure that I can say that Silent Hill 2 is a fun game to play, but fun wasn't really ever the goal. Playing this with headphones on in the dark was absolutely the way to experience this, as the sound design crawls under your skin with each opportunity it gets. There were times I would hear breathing or footsteps right behind me, only to turn around and see nothing at all. It's a heavy experience that really puts you in the protagonist James's shoes, and Luke Roberts' portrayal of the character makes a great case for being considered one of the great video game performances of all time. Even with just his battle grunts, you can feel the heartbreak and the repression with each swing. You could feel him working through something. It's brilliant. Now, there was some definite bloat in some of the later locations, and I think shaving maybe an hour or so off would be great for the overall pacing, but it's hard to be too critical of a game that enraptured me as much as this one did. By the end of the game, I was so caught up in the magic trick that it pulled off that instead of jumping right in to go for the Platinum Trophy, I've shelved it for now. To go through all that, to break the game open in that way, would do a disservice to how beautifully horrific this was. I want to hold on to my original memory of Silent Hill 2 just a little bit longer. That last entry was pretty heavy. How about get around to something a little bit lighter with number 2 on my list, Astro Bot. If you ever needed proof that Nintendo doesn't own a monopoly on joyfully colorful platformers, here it is. After the wonderful yet short pack-in title for the PS5, Astro's Playroom, Team Asobi was given the opportunity to make a full-fledged Astro Bot platformer, and they hit it out of the park. Anyone who talks about this game mentions how it is nearly impossible to play it without a dumb, goofy smile on your face, and I will be the next person to echo that sentiment. There is an inevitable joy to controlling Astro that could only come from perfectly tight controls and inventive level design. The power-up gimmicks here are so unique and brilliant, but what makes each of them stand out is that they don't outstay their welcome. Power-ups like the sponge one are only ever used once in the base game, but that allows that level to leave an indelible mark on the player. And all of that is just mentioning the gameplay mechanics. There are moments in this game that are overloaded with perhaps the largest amount of just things on the screen I've seen with no slowdown at all. The challenge levels, which take these perfect mechanics and put your skills to the test, and of course, the PlayStation cameo bots. I've seen some discourse online about how these cameo bots make the game just a commercial for PlayStation, and I'm sorry, but like, have some joy in your life. Could ya? These cameos are clearly a celebration of what has come before, especially when it comes to the amount of cameos from Japan Studio in particular. After Japan Studio was shut down, a lot of these devs were able to continue the legacy of these beloved characters within Astro Bot, and if that doesn't at least warm your heart a bit, what are you, a robot? Sorry. Poor choice of words. Astro Bot is PlayStation's best first-party exclusive for the PS5, and I cannot wait to see where Team Asobi takes the little guy next. Well, we've made it. We're at number 1. And instead of taking any more of your time, let's just dive into my game of the year. Square Enix Creative Business Unit 1's, by God, that is a mouthful to say, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. To anyone who knows me, could this have been anything else? People often talk about their cast of JRPG characters, whether it be from a Persona or even another Final Fantasy game, but the cast of JRPG characters for so many, including myself, is Cloud and the gang. I know, getting real controversial right out the gate. Surely nobody loves the team from probably the most beloved JRPG of all time. But man, do I feel blessed to be alive in a time where we are actually seeing the original remade and reimagined in its own way. The way Rebirth digs into the characterization of the party and fleshes out the interpersonal relationships between these characters too is nothing short of magical. Tifa and Aerith's friendship, Barrett and Yuffie's sibling-esque bickering, the juxtaposition between Cloud and Red 13's cold shell that they present to the world, it's all just amazing to watch unfold and builds upon the mythos of these legendary characters while also not being afraid to do its own thing at times. Sure, there are some complaints out there that maybe the overall story isn't quite as different as some might have hoped, or that the first part of this trilogy may have implied. And no spoilers, but from where this game left off, I just don't agree with that take at all. But of course, what of the gameplay, right? Rebirth takes what already worked so well about Remake's combat and perfects it, making your team composition really matter, not only for the difference in abilities, but also so that you can see all of the insanely cool team-up moves that can shift the tide of a battle in an instant, especially when you get to some of the tougher optional fights later in the game. And I'm not kidding you when I say that this might have been one of the most difficult platinum trophies I've ever earned. Those final combat simulators are no joke and required a level of patience and planning that I honestly didn't know I was capable of. Of course, a part of that platinum trophy was also all of the mini games packed in here, and guys, they really didn't have to go this hard with the sheer variety of mini games. There's a Fall Guys like frog mini game, Chocobo racing, a Rocket League like soccer game, and the crown jewel of all mini games, the card game Queen's Blood. I know it's been said before, but Square, please spin this off as its own game. I would waste so much damn time on it. By the time I was finished with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I had put in nearly 200 hours, and I loved every second of it. Aside from maybe some of the strife the harder combat challenges put me through, maybe not that as much, but There are few games that have moved me quite as much as Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has. From moments of childlike wonder to moments of gut-wrenching heartbreak, there are even fewer games that have heard as many of my cheers and tears. Like so many others, this group is my JRPG party, and I cannot wait to see them all again in Part 3. Well, there you have it. That's my list. If you have your list of top 10 games of the year, or even just your game of the year, throw it down in the comments. I'd love to hear why it's your game of the year. And stick around. My plan this year is to do a new video each month. We'll see how well I stick to that schedule, but I'm very excited to talk about a horror game that was originally supposed to be an October video, but I neglected to do it. So stick around. We're gonna go through it. We're gonna have a great time. And thank you very much for watching.